Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. When I was around 10 or 11, my mum took me, my grandmother, and two of my cousins on a short trip. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment things. She'd found a deal online for a hotel up in the mountains. A small, quiet place with great views, surrounded by pine trees and long, winding roads that made you feel like you were driving away from everything. It was summer, late afternoon when we got there, and I remember the air feeling thinner, cooler, cleaner than in the city. The hotel wasn't large, just 3 or 4 stories painted a faded cream color, with a few flower boxes on the balconies. It looked old, but in a comfortable way, like it had been there forever, and people just forgot about it. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. The woman at the front desk looked half asleep, like she'd been there all day, and her voice had that tired kind of politeness you hear from people who are just trying to get through their shift. Mom handled the check-in while we waited by the couches, which sagged in the middle and made soft creaking noises when you sat down. There was a glass bowl of wrapped candies on the counter, and I took one, unwrapping it quietly and sticking the wrapper in my pocket. The elevator was small and slow, the kind that hums loudly and shakes a little when it starts moving. It smelled like dust and something metallic, maybe from the old wiring. Our room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a narrow hallway lined with faded patterned carpet and low lights that gave everything a yellow tint. The door opened with a loud click, and we stepped into a dimly lit space that looked pretty standard. 2 beds, a couch, a small TV mounted on the wall, and a little table by the window. Wasn't fancy, but it was clean looking, or at least it seemed that way at first. We started settling in. Mum pulled back the covers on one of the beds, and I remember her stopping suddenly. I looked over and saw her staring down at the sheet. There were faint reddish smears on the white fabric, dark enough to stand out. She touched it, frowning, then pulled the sheet back further, and there it was. A patch of dried blood near the pillow. Beside it, on the nightstand, was a glass, and I noticed the rim was smudged with lipstick. It wasn't ours. Someone had clearly been staying there before, and whoever cleaned the room had missed all of it. My stomach turned a bit at the sight. It wasn't a huge amount of blood, but enough to make the whole room feel wrong. Mum's face tightened, and she went straight for the phone to call the front desk. It took her a while, but eventually, after some arguing, she left the room to talk to the receptionist in person. When she came back, she looked irritated and said they'd blamed the blood on us at first, like we'd somehow made the mess after arriving. I hadn't even sat on the bed yet. Made no sense. They told her the hotel was full, no other rooms available, but Mom can be stubborn when she's angry. After a while, she managed to get them to double-check, and suddenly, they did have another room. Same layout, just a few floors higher. We gathered our bags again and headed up. The higher we went, the quieter it felt. The hallway on that floor was darker, the bulbs flickering a little, and it smelled faintly of something like damp fabric. The new room looked almost identical to the first. Same furniture, same carpet, same heavy curtains. But when I went to look out the window, I noticed something strange. There was a line of uncooked rice across the windowsill. A thin trail that looked like someone had carefully sprinkled it there. I thought it was weird. Who puts rice on a windowsill? When my grandmother came in, she noticed it too, and casually said it was something people did to keep away bad spirits. I didn't really believe in that stuff, so I just rolled my eyes, and we laughed about it for a second before moving on. The evening passed normally enough. We had some snacks from the car, watched TV for a bit, and got ready for bed. The plan was simple. My grandmother would sleep in the smaller room. My boy cousin would take the couch, and Mum, me, and my baby cousin would share the main bed. The baby cousin was only about 4, and she was already half asleep when Mum turned off the lights. For a while, everything was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you more aware of every little sound. The hum of the mini fridge, The ticking clock on the wall, the occasional creak from the floorboards above us. Then I heard it, a soft, repetitive knocking sound. Not loud, just faint and rhythmic, like something gently tapping against glass. At first, I thought maybe someone was outside, but the window was shut. The sound seemed to come from the blinds, the long vertical ones that hung down beside the window frame. They were moving, slightly bumping against the window as if there was a draft. Mom got up, tired and annoyed, and checked. The window was sealed tight, no air coming through. She noticed again there was rice on this windowsill too. She brushed her hand near it, checked the frame for any gaps, but there was nothing. She turned the light on to see better, and the movement stopped instantly. The blinds went still like they hadn't moved at all. She looked confused, glanced around, then turned the lights off again. Within seconds, the noise started back up. The blinds began tapping softly again, faster this time. The sound echoed faintly against the window. It was steady, unnatural in its rhythm. She turned the lights on once more. Again, it stopped. The room felt tense and heavy in the silence that followed. She walked around the room, checking the vents, the floor, even the space under the curtains. There, he was nothing. No source of air, no sign of anything moving them. When she switched off the lights the third time, the tapping began almost immediately. Louder now, more distinct, like something was gently but deliberately nudging them. My heart was pounding. I remember the feeling. It wasn't fear of something specific, just that awful sense that something was wrong. The air felt colder. Even Mom looked uneasy. Standing there, with her hand on the light switch, staring at the blinds. Eventually, she gave up trying to figure it out. She sat down on the edge of the bed and started quietly praying under her breath. She was religious, and it was the only thing that seemed to calm her. I stayed under the covers, my eyes fixed on the window, watching the faint movement of the blinds in the dark. The sound kept going for a while, then slowly faded, until the only noise left was the low hum of the fridge again. My baby cousin slept through everything, completely unaware. My grandmother was in the next room and I didn't want to wake her. I must have eventually drifted off, though I remember thinking I'd never fall asleep. Morning came fast, sunlight spilling through the curtains, the room looking completely normal again. The blinds hung still. The rice was still there. Nothing seemed out of place. We didn't talk much during breakfast, just packed our things quietly, checked out, and got back in the car. Mom didn't even complain to the staff. She just wanted to leave. A few weeks later, I overheard her talking to someone on the phone. She'd looked up the hotel online and found an old local news article about a woman who had died there about a year before our visit. She had jumped out of one of the windows. They didn't say which floor or which room. The article was short, factual, no real details. I remember her showing it to my grandmother, who just nodded silently. No one said much after that. I've stayed in a lot of hotels since then, but I still remember that one night, clearly. The smell of the room, the sound of the blinds, the feeling that something unseen was just out of reach. Watching quietly. I don't believe in ghosts. I really don't. There's probably an explanation for everything that happened. Maybe a draft from the vent system. Maybe static. Maybe just coincidence. But even now, I can still hear that faint knocking sound if I think about it too long. That strange rhythm that only started when the lights went out and stopped the second they came back on. We never went back to that place again. I don't think my mom ever wanted to. And I never asked which room it was that woman jumped from. I don't want to know. I used to work at a hotel a few years ago. Just a small business hotel near the interstate. Nothing fancy. It was my first real job after college. I was still learning the ropes, checking people in, handling phone calls, balancing the till at the end of the night. The place had that typical mid-range hotel look. Beige walls, patterned, carpet, the faint smell of bleach and air freshener in the hallways. It wasn't new, but it wasn't falling apart either. Just one of those places people stayed for a night or two on business trips or road stops. I remember it was a Friday evening not long after I started. The lobby was busier than usual. Phones ringing, guests walking in, luggage wheels echoing off the tiled floor. My trainer, an older woman named Karen, was handling check-ins while I shadowed her. We just realized the hotel was overbooked. Apparently, a system error had allowed too many reservations. Karen muttered under her breath and scrolled through the computer system, trying to figure out how to accommodate everyone. After a few minutes, she sighed and said there was one room they could open. She looked at me and said, "Go dust it off. Room 204. It's been closed for a while." I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe it was being renovated or used for storage. She handed me a small cleaning kit and a key card and told me to go get it ready for a walk-in guest who would be arriving soon. The elevator smelled faintly like disinfectant. I remember watching the numbers blink up from 1 to 2. When the doors opened, the hallway was quiet. Too quiet compared to the lobby downstairs. The carpet felt a little softer under my shoes, maybe just thicker or less worn down since that floor wasn't used as much. The walls were pale yellow, lit by wall sconces that gave off a dim, warm light. Room 204 was at the far end of the hall near the window that faced the parking lot. I slid the key card in, and the lock clicked open with a dull sound. When I pushed the door open, it stuck for a second, like it hadn't been opened in months. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not bad, just old stale air, like a room that had been closed off too long. I turned on the first switch near the door, and the entryway light came on dimly, flickering once before staying on. The room looked ordinary enough. 2 queen beds, a nightstand in between, a dresser with a small TV on top, and a heavy curtain covering the window. But everything was coated in a layer of dust. It was thicker than I expected. The desk had fingerprints frozen in it, probably from the last time someone had been there. The beds were made, but the sheets were yellowed slightly at the edges, like they'd sat untouched for too long. I started by wiping down the surfaces near the door, the counter, the light switches. The rag came away grey after just one swipe. It was like cleaning a storage room, not a hotel suite. I worked my way deeper into the room, cleaning the dresser, the nightstand, the headboards. When I got to the nightstand between the 2 beds, I reached for the lamp. The base was heavy metal, a little tarnished. When I turned it on, the bulb flickered several times before finally staying lit. It buzzed faintly, the kind of sound old bulbs make when they're about to die. That's when it happened. Behind me, the TV snapped, on by itself. The sudden burst of static made me jump. It was loud, sharp, out of nowhere. I turned around fast. The screen was filled with white noise, the image pulsing faintly as the sound grew louder. Started at a normal volume, but climbed fast, like someone was holding down the button on the remote, except the remote wasn't in anyone's hand. It was sitting right on top of the TV. I froze for a second, unsure if maybe I had bumped something or stepped on a remote that fell somewhere. But there was nothing near my feet. The static sound grew even louder, almost painfully loud. Then the channels started flipping by themselves. Static. Then flashes of color, bits of random shows, quick cuts of people talking or weather reports, then back to static again. The remote stayed still the whole time. My heart was pounding. The sound filled the room, echoing off the walls. I remember staring at the TV, trying to make sense of it, and then feeling this cold rush go through my body. Not like a chill, more like adrenaline. Something about the way the screen flickered felt wrong. The lamp beside me flickered too, in rhythm with the TV, like the power was struggling. That was enough for me. I dropped the rag and backed toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I could still hear the TV volume going up past the normal limit, almost crackling. I yanked the door open and stepped into the hallway. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the noise cut off completely. The silence hit me just as hard as the sound had. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, looking back at the open door. The room looked exactly the same. Lamp on, beds untouched, remote still sitting on top of the TV. I didn't go back in. I closed the door and just walked straight to the elevator, gripping the cleaning cloth in my hand without realizing I still had it. When I got back downstairs, I must have looked pale. One of the housekeeping ladies saw me walk through the hall and asked what happened. I just said something was wrong with the TV in 204. She looked at me for a second, then gave a little laugh. Not surprised, not mocking, just like she expected it. She told me they never used that room. That's when she said almost casually that a man had hung himself there years ago. I didn't even know what to say. Later, I checked the system. The note on 204 said, "Out of service." No maintenance order, no reason listed, just those 3 words. Out of service. That night, when things slowed down, I sat at the desk, replaying everything in my head. I kept trying to find a logical reason. Power surge, faulty wiring, remote interference. Maybe some old universal remote from another room was on the same frequency. I even went up the next day with a maintenance guy to check it out. The TV worked fine. No flickering, no static. The lamp too, he said it was dusty, but otherwise fine. But standing there again in that same room, the air still felt heavy. Not cold, just still like something was stuck in the air. The kind of silence where you can hear your own breathing. After that, nobody used that room again. Whenever we were short on rooms, they still skipped over 204. Sometimes I'd see it on the screen, still marked out of service, and I'd remember that moment, the way the static filled the room, how the sound kept climbing, and how it stopped the second I left. I never told anyone else the full story. There was no reason to. It wasn't like I believed in anything supernatural, and I still don't. I just know what I saw and heard, and I know I hadn't touched that TV. I stayed at that job for another year. Every now and then, someone new would ask about the extra room on the second floor. Karen would just say, "Don't worry about it," and move on. I'd keep quiet. Even now, years later, I still remember the sound of that static, how it felt like it filled every inch of that dusty room, how it stopped. The instant I ran. It's one of those things that never really leaves your memory, not because it was supernatural, but because it didn't make sense. And sometimes the things that don't make sense are the ones that stay with you the longest. This happened to my father, not me, but it's one of those stories that has stuck in my head ever since he told me. It wasn't anything dramatic in the sense of monsters or ghosts, but the kind of thing that makes you question what you saw, what you smelled, what you felt, and if your brain was ever really right after that night. My father was a doctor and went on volunteer trips from time to time. This one took place in Tanzania, in a rural area, several hours outside Dar es Salaam. The group was small, mostly doctors, nurses, and volunteers working with a medical outreach program to treat people in a poor village. For a few nights before heading out to the village, the group stayed in a hotel. It wasn't a fancy hotel, just a plain aging building with concrete walls, peeling paint, and a tiled lobby that always seemed a bit damp. The rooms were basic. 2 twin beds, a wooden dresser, a single standing fan, and a bathroom with a floor drain instead of a shower curtain. My father said it had that musty mix of detergent and humidity that old hotels in tropical climates tend to have, like wet linen that never fully dries. He was sharing the room with another man from the group, a quiet older physician named Mark. They weren't close, but they got along fine. The first day was normal enough. They spent hours checking supplies, repacking medical kits, organizing boxes of donated medications, and meeting the local coordinators. Everyone was tired by the time they turned in that night. Sometime after midnight, my father woke up to the sound of movement. When he opened his eyes, the room was dimly lit by the bedside lamp. Mark was sitting up in his bed, trembling, both hands clasped tightly like he was praying. The lamplight made his face look pale, and his eyes were wide open, locked on some point across the room. My father sat up confused, still half asleep. He asked what was wrong, but Mark didn't answer. He just kept shaking, whispering something under his breath. My father thought maybe he was having a nightmare or a panic attack. There wasn't much he could do, and Mark wasn't responding. So, after a while, he lay back down. The light stayed on, But eventually, my dad drifted off again. The next morning, Mark looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands still slightly unsteady when he poured his coffee. My dad noticed but didn't want to push. People sometimes reacted differently to new environments. Jet lag, malaria, medication, lack of sleep, dehydration. They had a long day ahead, so he left it alone. The second night was when things went wrong. They both turned in around 1000 p.m. The room was warm, despite the fan running, and my father said he remembered lying there for what felt like hours, listening to the hum of insects outside the window and the faint drone of traffic somewhere, far off. At some point, he must have dozed off because when he woke up again, it was the middle of the night. The fan had stopped spinning. Power outages were common there, and the air was still and hot. He got up to use the bathroom. The bathroom door creaked loudly when he pushed it open. The tiles under his feet were cold. He stood there in the half-dark, the only light coming from the faint moonlight through the window slats. As he started to relieve himself, he caught a sharp smell that cut through everything. The thick, pungent scent of body odor. It was so strong it made him hesitate midstream. It wasn't his or Mark's. My father had noticed before that many of the local villagers didn't wear deodorant regularly, and it was a distinctive, very human smell that hid immediately. The problem was, their room was locked from the inside. Nobody could have come in. The windows were barred. He froze. The smell was close. Too close. Like someone was standing right behind him. When he turned, he saw her. There in the doorway stood a woman. She wasn't moving, but her whole body trembled like a vibration running through her limbs. Her eyes were rolled upward so that only the white showed, fixed on the ceiling. She wasn't wearing much, just a thin, faded dress that looked damp. Her hair was messy, like it had been wet and dried in clumps. For a moment, my father couldn't even process what he was looking at. His first thought was that she was sick or injured, that maybe she had wandered in somehow from outside. He blinked, took half a step back, and looked again, and she was gone. Just gone. No sound, no door closing, no movement. The doorway was empty, the air still. He stood there, heart hammering, staring at the open door. He walked forward, looked around the main part of the room. Nothing. The only sound was Mark's slow breathing from the other bed. My father checked the lock. Still bolted, he tried to convince himself it had been a trick of the light, a dream, something caused by exhaustion. He went back to bed, but the smell lingered faintly in the air. It was hard to shake off. Lying on his side, he stared at the wall, his heart still racing. Gradually, his breathing slowed, and he began to drift. Just as he was on the edge of sleep, the smell came back, stronger this time. He rolled onto his other side, and there she was, the same woman lying flat on her back in the other bed, right where Mark had been sleeping the night before. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling just like before, her chest rising and falling with small, jerky movements, as if she was breathing through shallow spasms. He didn't move. Every instinct told him to get up, to run, to do something, but his body wouldn't respond. The sound of his own pulse filled his ears. He shut his eyes tightly, like that would make her vanish. When he finally forced himself to look again, the bed was empty. Mark was there again, asleep, turned away from him. My father lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, drenched in sweat. He said that for hours he kept catching that same faint trace of body odor, coming and going like it was drifting through the room. He didn't close his eyes again until morning light started to filter through the curtains. When they went down for breakfast, he didn't mention it right away, but later that morning, he brought it up to Mark in a careful, indirect way. He didn't want to sound insane. Before he even got the words out, Mark looked at him and said quietly that he'd seen something the night before, too. He wouldn't go into details, but the look on his face was enough to tell my father they'd both experienced the same thing. That explained why Mark had been so shaken that first night. They both decided not to talk about it anymore. It didn't make sense. No one could have entered the room, and both of them were taking the same antimalarial medication, which was known for causing vivid hallucinations, especially in people not used to it. It was the most logical explanation. Maybe the combination of jet lag, heat, medication, and fatigue had messed with their heads. Even so, my father said that he had never experienced anything before or since that felt that real. The smell, the look of her skin, the sound of her breathing. It wasn't like a dream. It had weight, detail, presence. They checked out 2 days later. Neither mentioned the incident to anyone else in the group. My father said that on the drive out toward the village, he kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see the same woman standing by the roadside, but she never appeared again. Years later, when he told me the story, he said he still couldn't decide what had really happened. Maybe it was the drug side effects. Maybe exhaustion and suggestion made it worse. Maybe seeing his roommate terrified the first night had planted the seed for what he experienced the second. The brain does strange things when you're sleep deprived and under stress, in an unfamiliar place. But he also said that even now, decades later, if he closes his eyes and thinks about that hotel, he can still smell that same sharp, sour scent. He can still see her face in the dim light of that tiled bathroom, shaking silently, eyes rolled upward. He never went back to Tanzania after that. He finished the trip, came home, and continued his work elsewhere. He always said the experience didn't scare him because of what he saw, but because of how real it felt and how quickly his mind tried to rationalize something it couldn't make sense of. He didn't call it supernatural. He called it human, because sometimes what we think we see in the dark is just our brain trying to process something we're not meant to understand. But still, he said he would never forget that smell. Not in his entire life. I was staying at the Hyatt in Birmingham, Alabama for work. It wasn't one of those rundown roadside hotels. It was clean, modern, the kind of place where you expect a good night's sleep. I travel a lot, usually close to 240 nights a year in hotels, so I've seen just about every kind of place. The Hyatt was a nice change. Big lobby, clean carpet, quiet hallways, and the kind of neutral smell you only get in business hotels. Faint air freshener, mixed with old HVAC air. I checked in late around 9 after a long day. My room was on the 8th floor, facing the parking lot. The front desk clerk told me they were at high occupancy because of some local conference, but my room seemed fine. Standard king bed, desk, TV, and a bathroom with those tiny square tiles. Nothing strange, nothing off. The first night, I remember falling asleep pretty fast. I had the AC running low because I like cold rooms when I sleep. It was one of those box-style units under the window with the fake wood casing built around it. I set it to 67 degrees, turned off the lights, and crawled under the white duvet. I don't usually dream, or if I do, I forget by morning. But around 0 inches, the morning, I woke up to this sound that jolted me upright. It was a scream. One of those raw, blood-chilling screams you can't mistake for anything else. Sounded like someone being stabbed or seriously hurt. A man's voice, loud and short, like one burst of agony that echoed down the hallway, or maybe from another room. My heart started hammering. I sat up, eyes wide, staring at the door. I waited for another sound, footsteps, yelling, something, but nothing came. Just silence broken by the low hum of the AC. I looked at the clock. 2:04 a.m. For a minute, I considered calling the front desk, but then I second-guessed myself. I've had dreams that felt real before, especially when I'm exhausted. The scream was so sharp that I wondered if I'd imagined it as I was half asleep. After a few minutes of sitting there in the dark, I convinced myself that's all it was. Maybe someone had a nightmare in another room. Maybe it was outside. I tried to lie back down, though it took a long time for my heartbeat to settle. Eventually, I fell asleep again. The next morning, I woke up, groggy, but brushed it off. I went about my day like normal. Meetings, lunch with co-workers, answering emails from the hotel desk. Everything was normal. I even told someone in passing that I'd had a weird dream about someone screaming, but it didn't seem worth mentioning beyond that. The second night, though, that's what stuck with me. I went to bed around midnight after watching some mindless TV, had a bottle of water, turned out the lights, and let the AC hum fill the room. The white noise helps me sleep. I drifted off easily, but at some point, I woke up again. I didn't know why at first, but something felt wrong. It was that kind of stillness that feels heavy. I remember lying on my side, facing the window, eyes open, and realizing I was fully awake. The room felt darker than usual. Even though there was a faint orange glow from the parking lot lights outside, there was this sudden gut-deep feeling that I wasn't alone. I can't really explain it. It wasn't a sound or a shadow. It was more like an awareness, like the air was different. I rolled over, pulling the blanket closer, and that's when I saw him. He was sitting on the wooden box that covered the AC unit, maybe 6 or 7 feet from the end of my bed. He was facing slightly away from me, hunched forward a little, one arm resting on his knee, the other holding what looked like a cigarette. He was smoking slow and calm, the smoke rising faintly in the dark. The room didn't smell like smoke, though, which made it feel even stranger because I could clearly see the amber glow each time he inhaled. He looked old, maybe in his 60s, bald on top with a thin ring of white hair around the sides. His face was soft but lined, and he had a thick grey moustache. He was wearing blue coveralls, the kind mechanics or maintenance guys wear, and a red and white checkered shirt underneath. The sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and he had a kind of heavy build, broad stomach, thick arms. He was just sitting there quietly, like he'd been there a long time. I remember staring at him for several seconds, not breathing, trying to understand what I was looking at. My brain was trying to make sense of it, thinking maybe it was a reflection, or someone had actually broken into my room. Then he slowly turned his head toward me. That's when I jolted upright. The moment I moved, he wasn't there anymore. The space was empty, just the AC unit humming, the faint draft of cool air on my legs. I sat there frozen, wide awake, heart racing so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I looked around the whole room, the corners, the bathroom door, under the desk, even opened the closet. Nothing. The air felt completely still. I turned on the lamp by the bed and sat there for probably 20 minutes trying to calm down. It didn't feel like a dream. I know what dreaming feels like. I've had sleep paralysis once before years ago, but this wasn't that. I could move freely. I rolled over, adjusted the blanket, sat up, and turned on the light with no resistance. There wasn't that frozen feeling. No pressure on my chest. None of the stuff people describe with sleep paralysis. It was just me fully awake, seeing something that shouldn't have been there. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept the lamp on the rest of the night, sitting up every time I thought I heard the AC click or the ice machine down the hall pop. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the sun came up, I went downstairs to get coffee. Everything looked perfectly normal. People eating breakfast, front desk staff smiling, a family checking out. I felt crazy even thinking about mentioning it, so I didn't. For the next few days, I stayed in the same room because I didn't want to look like I was losing my mind by asking to move. Nothing else happened. No screams, no man, nothing strange. I started thinking maybe it had something to do with exhaustion or the air conditioning, maybe a trick of light and half-leap. But the image of that man burned into my mind. I can still picture him. The folds of his coveralls, the way the cigarette glowed orange near his face, the way he turned his head toward me so slowly. It felt mechanical. A few days later, when I checked out, I was still uneasy. As I was packing, I realized I couldn't remember much from that trip at all. What I ate, where I went after work, even some of the meetings. Everything felt kind of foggy, like that one night had drained my focus. I thought about something someone online once said about carbon monoxide in hotel rooms, that if a unit wasn't ventilating properly, You could have mild poisoning and not even realize it can cause confusion, vivid hallucinations, even hearing things that aren't there. I started wondering if that could explain it. The AC unit had been running constantly, and I remembered how heavy the air felt that night. It hadn't clicked in my head before, but I did feel off. Headaches, slight nausea, like jet lag that didn't go away. When I mentioned it to someone later, they told me, carbon monoxide leaks happen more often than people think, especially in older buildings with older air systems. Thinking back, that idea scares me more than the man himself. Because if it was carbon monoxide, it means I might have been slowly suffocating and hallucinating without realizing it. But if it wasn't, if I was completely clear-headed, then I really don't know what I saw. Either way, I never stayed in that hotel again. When I travel now, I always check where the AC vents are, and I keep a small carbon monoxide detector in my luggage. Most nights, I still sleep fine. But sometimes, when the room is too quiet and the AC kicks on, I catch myself looking toward the unit, just to make sure no one's sitting there. Music. We had been on the road for close to 9 hours when it happened. My buddy and I were both in college at the time, heading down to Florida to watch our team play in the big game. It was one of those long drives that started off exciting, filled with fast food wrappers and energy drinks. But by midnight, the excitement had worn off, and the exhaustion was setting in hard. I was behind the wheel, pushing 80 down the Florida Turnpike, the road stretching endlessly ahead under the dull yellow glow of the headlights. The air inside the cab was stale, with the smell of gas station, coffee, and beef jerky. I had a CB radio mounted under the dash, something I picked up the previous year because I liked chatting with truckers on long drives. It was tuned to Channel 19, the general highway channel. Most of the time it was just chatter, truckers warning each other about speed traps or construction zones. My friend had the map open, tracing our route with his finger, trying to find a rest stop or a motel somewhere nearby where we could crash for a few hours before continuing the drive the next morning. That's when the voice came through. It was low and growly, cutting through the static like someone whispering directly into the cab. I didn't know you. Tennessee boys could read a map. For a moment, I froze. My friend and I looked at each other. We both had Tennessee plates, sure, but it was dark. So dark. And there hadn't been another set of headlights behind us for miles. I glanced into the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the endless black road. Then, maybe half a mile behind us, a set of headlights appeared, bright and high off the ground. Semi. We both laughed nervously, realizing it must have been one of the truckers. I grabbed the mic, told him we were just trying to find a place to crash for a few hours. The man chuckled and told us there wasn't much around. But about 10 miles up the road, there'd be an exit with a small motel. Said it wasn't fancy, but it had due for a night. He gave us the exit number, said to turn right and follow the small road until we saw it. I thanked him, and we kept driving. The radio went quiet. Again, except for the hum of static. We found the exit. Just like he said. The highway lights faded as we turned off onto a smaller 2-lane road that looked barely used. The world seemed to shrink as the road got narrower, lined on both sides with thick, dark woods. My headlights caught the glint of old metal road signs, their paint faded and streaked with rust. It was close to 2:30 inches the morning by then, and we hadn't seen another car since leaving the highway. After a few minutes, a glowing vacancy sign appeared in the distance, its red letters blinking unevenly in the dark. As we got closer, the whole place came into view. It looked like something straight out of a movie. Small, single story with peeling paint, and a row of maybe 8 or 10 rooms, each with a dull yellow porch light above the door. The office was at one end of the building, its windows dark except for a faint light glowing from somewhere in the back. We parked right in front of the office. There were no other cars. In the lot, the asphalt was cracked and uneven with weeds pushing through. The air was heavy and damp, the kind of Florida humidity that sticks to your skin even in the middle of the night. We walked up to the glass door. There was a little open sign hanging sideways, but no one was inside. The counter was bare except for a dusty bell and an old wooden key rack on the wall behind it. A single light bulb flickered somewhere in the back room. I knocked once. Nothing. Then again, louder. Still nothing. I tried the bell. It didn't make a sound, just rattled loosely under my hand. I leaned over the counter and looked toward the back. There was a cot with a blanket on it, and something that looked like a pair of boots sitting next to it. We walked back outside and down the row of rooms, just to see if maybe someone else was around. Every door had an old brass number nailed to it. None of the lights were on. The windows were dark, curtains drawn. There were no other vehicles, no signs of guests, not even a sound except for the buzzing of the sign. Something about it made me uneasy. I told my friend maybe we should just sleep in the truck, but he shook his head. We were both too tired and the truck seats weren't exactly comfortable, so we went back to the office. I raised my voice, calling out aloud, "Hello!" The sound echoed down the empty hall behind the counter. A few seconds passed before a shape moved behind the counter. A young man sat up suddenly on the cot, blinking in the dim light like he had just been pulled out of a deep sleep. He looked to be in his early 20s, thin, hair matted, wearing an old t-shirt and jeans. He stared at us for a second like he couldn't remember where he was. Then he stood up and rubbed his face. He asked what we needed, his voice flat and tired. I told him we just wanted a room for the night. He nodded slowly, stretched his arms, and said something I'll never forget, that we could pick whichever room we wanted. They were all unlocked. I remember glancing at my friend, wondering if we'd heard him right, but the guy just yawned, turned around, and went into the back again, leaving us standing there. We walked down the row again, testing the doors. Every single one opened without a key. The first one we walked into smelled faintly of disinfectant and mildew. There were 2 queen beds, each covered in those old patterned comforters that every cheap motel seems to have. The carpet was thin and worn, and the wallpaper was yellowed with age. The bathroom light flickered when I turned it on. The tiles were a dull, brownish green, the kind that looked like they belonged in an old school or hospital. The sink had a slow drip that echoed in the quiet. We checked a few of the other rooms, but they all looked the same. Some smelled worse than others. We picked the cleanest one and brought in our bags. I sat on the edge of one bed. The mattress sagged heavily in the middle. My friend used the bathroom first while I flipped through the old TV channels. Half of them were static, and the ones that did come through were fuzzy. When it was my turn, I took a quick shower, trying not to touch the walls. The tiles were grimy near the edges, and there was a faint brown ring around the drain. The water pressure was weak, and the pipes made loud knocking sounds. Afterward, we both lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, just trying to get a little rest. The air conditioner rattled loudly in the wall, but didn't blow much air. I closed my eyes and tried to drift off, but every small sound made me open them again. The hum of the light, the creak of the bed springs when either of us moved, the faint drip of the faucet. At one point, I thought I heard something outside. Not footsteps exactly, but something scraping lightly against the gravel lot. When I looked out through the curtain, I didn't see anything, just the empty parking lot and the blinking red sign reflecting off the truck's windshield. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I opened my eyes again, the room felt different. The air had gotten colder. My phone said it was a little after 4, 0 inches the morning. My friend was awake too, staring up at the ceiling. Neither of us had slept well. He said he kept feeling like he heard doors open and close down the hallway, though when I listened, I couldn't hear anything but the hum of the air unit. By 5, we both gave up trying to rest. The sky outside was still dark, but a faint grey line was forming on the horizon. We decided to just pack up and leave. We went back to the office where the same guy was asleep again on his cot. The smell of stale coffee hung in the air. I knocked gently on the counter until he stirred. He blinked up at us, looking just as disoriented as before. We told him we were heading out and asked how much we owed. He shrugged, rubbed his eyes, and muttered something like $10. No register, no receipt, nothing. just the number. I handed him a $10 bill. He stuffed it in his pocket without counting it and lay back down on the cot before we even made it to the door. When we stepped outside, the early morning air felt cooler, cleaner. I remember taking a deep breath and feeling like I was shaking off a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The red sign buzzed behind us as we got in the truck. Back on the highway, as the sun came up, we didn't talk much. The whole thing had felt strange. Too strange to joke about yet. We'd only been there a few hours, but it stuck with me. The silence of the place, the empty rooms, the man who didn't seem to care if we stayed or not. We made it to the game later that day, tired but running on adrenaline. Every now and then, though, when I think about that trip, I still picture that motel, the cracked asphalt, the still air, and the way every door had been left unlocked, waiting for someone to walk in. I was staying at a small hotel in Bisbee, Arizona, a place that feels like it's stuck halfway between being a town and being a memory. I'd driven in late in the afternoon, winding through the narrow streets lined with old brick buildings, most of them tilted slightly from years of shifting desert ground. Bisbee sits in a valley surrounded by hills that looked like they've been carved and forgotten by miners long ago. The air had that dry, dusty smell of old wood and iron, the kind that sticks to your clothes after a while. I had been on the road for a few days, and Bisbee seemed like a quiet place to spend a night before heading south. The hotel I checked into wasn't fancy, but it had character. The kind of old Western charm that people like to take pictures of, but not necessarily stay in. The front of the building was tall and narrow, with a big wooden sign that looked hand-painted decades ago. Inside, the lobby had a grand entryway that felt out of place in such a small town. A high ceiling with a chandelier that gave off a yellow glow, worn checkered tile floors, and a wide marble staircase that split near the top. One of the first things I noticed was a small plaque on the wall near the staircase. It explained that the chip in the marble halfway up was supposedly from when Pancho Villa rode his horse through the hotel back in the early 1900s. I ran my fingers along the chipped spot out of curiosity. The marble was cold and smooth, except for the rough edge of the break. I remember the front desk clerk mentioning something about the hotel being over 100 years old, and that parts of it hadn't been renovated because they wanted to keep its history. The place definitely felt that way. The walls had uneven paint, the hallways were narrow and dim, and the air had a faint musty smell mixed with old carpet cleaner. But I liked it. It felt quiet, authentic, and different from the chain hotels I'd been staying in. My room was on the second floor, at the end of the hall. It had tall windows facing the street, and old wooden shutters that creaked when I tried to close them. The bed was soft but sagged in the middle, and the radiator made small clicking sounds every few minutes. I unpacked my bag, showered, and went downstairs to grab something from the small cafe attached to the hotel. The night was calm. A few people walked by outside, their footsteps echoing faintly off the walls of the narrow street. By the time I went back up to my room, it was a little after 10. I fell asleep easily that night, tired from driving. But sometime around 4, 0 inches the morning, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The room was dark, except for a thin line of light coming through the curtains from a street lamp outside. I just lay there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what had stirred me awake. Then I heard it. A faint sound, soft but clear enough to make me sit up. It was the sound of a piano. At first, I thought maybe someone had left a TV on in another room, but it wasn't that. The sound had that distinct hollow echo that only real piano keys make. Uneven pressure, a few slightly out-of-tune notes. The melody was slow and repetitive, like someone practicing or playing something from memory. It was faint, but carried through the stillness of the building. I sat there for a while listening. I didn't remember seeing a piano anywhere in the lobby or hallways. I figured maybe there was one in some side room, maybe an event space or an old lounge. I wasn't scared, just curious. The sound didn't seem threatening, just strange, especially at that hour. I got out of bed, put on a t-shirt, and slipped on my shoes. The hallway outside my room was cold. The old carpet muffled my steps as I made my way toward the staircase. The lights in the hallway were dim and flickering in some spots, the kind of yellow light that makes everything look slightly aged. When I reached the landing and looked down, the lobby below was completely still. The chandelier light was off now, and only the faint glow of a lamp at the reception desk lit part of the felled room. I stood there for a few seconds, listening again. The piano had stopped. I waited, hoping it might start up again, so I could tell where it was coming from. But there was nothing now, just the quiet hum of the old building. Figured maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it had come from outside somehow, though that didn't seem likely. I turned to go back upstairs, but as I climbed, I heard it again. Faint, but definitely there. The sound wasn't coming from the lobby after all. It was upstairs, on the same floor as my room. I paused, listening carefully. The notes were soft but clearer now, echoing slightly through the hallway. It didn't sound like it was coming from any of the occupied rooms, more like from somewhere beyond the end of the corridor. I started walking toward it, slow and careful. The closer I got, the more distinct the notes became. The player wasn't particularly skilled. A few notes were missed. Some were pressed harder than others. But there was something oddly consistent about the rhythm, like someone had played the same short melody over and over for years. As I moved down the hallway, I passed several closed doors. All of them looked the same, faded numbers on brass plaques, slightly crooked from years of repainting. The air felt cooler at this end of the hall, and I noticed the faint smell of dust and old furniture. The sound of the piano grew louder as I neared the very last door. It was a plain wooden door, slightly darker than the others, with no number on it. The paint around the edges was chipped, and there was a heavy padlock hanging from the latch, the kind of padlock you see on storage units, not hotel rooms. I leaned in close, pressing my ear against the wood. The piano music was right behind it. I could hear the distinct clinking of keys, the faint creak of the pedals. Whoever was playing was doing so just a few feet away from where I stood. I stayed there listening. My pulse was fast, not out of fear exactly, but confusion. The door was locked from the outside, and there were no windows along that part of the hall. I stepped back, half expecting the sound to stop now that I was there, but it didn't. The melody kept going, steady and soft, like the player was completely unaware of anyone listening. After a few moments, I noticed something. The tune never changed. It was the same pattern of notes looping again and again. Not a song exactly, more like someone practicing the same line without ever moving on. I stood there for maybe a full minute, just listening to it. Then it stopped. The silence hit hard. 1 second there was music, the next there was nothing. No shuffling, no creak of a bench, no sound of someone moving away, just absolute stillness. I waited. A few seconds passed, then a minute. I didn't move. The hallway felt colder now, the air heavier somehow. After another long stretch of silence, I turned and started walking back toward my room. My footsteps felt too loud in the quiet space. I didn't hear anything else. No doors opening or closing, no other guests moving around. When I got back inside my room, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed for a while. My heart was still beating fast, though I couldn't say why. It wasn't fear. It was just that strange feeling of something not adding up. I knew what I had heard. It wasn't a dream. Eventually, I lay back down, though it took a long time before I fell asleep again. The next morning, sunlight was coming through the shutters. The hallway outside was quiet when I left my room. I went down to the lobby, grabbed some coffee, and glanced up the staircase again. The same plaque about Pontchovilla was still there, the same chipped marble step. On my way out, I asked the front desk clerk casually if the hotel had a piano. He looked at me and said no, said they used to have one years ago, but it was removed because the room it was in had been closed off. Storage now. He pointed toward the same hallway I'd walked down. End of that hall, he said. Padlocked shut. I nodded. Didn't say anything else. I just thanked him, finished my coffee, and walked out into the morning light. The air outside was cool and dry, and the town was quiet, except for a few distant sounds from the main street. I didn't look back at the hotel when I got into my car. I didn't need to. I already knew which door it was, and I knew what I'd heard. But the part that stayed with me even now wasn't the music or the locked door. It was the silence that came after that sudden absolute stop, like whoever was playing knew I was there and had been waiting for me to find it. I was in Madagascar for a study abroad trip when the sickness finally hit me. It had been making its way through the group for days, one person after another. We all joked that it was like some curse that couldn't make up its mind, who to ruin next. When it was my turn, it wasn't funny anymore. My stomach felt like it was twisting itself into knots. Every few minutes, it would tighten, then release, then tighten again until I was sweating through my shirt. We were traveling that day, heading to our 4th hotel of the trip. I could barely sit up in the van, my forehead pressed against the cool glass as we wound through hills and small villages. When we finally pulled up to the hotel, I remember thinking it looked like a movie set. Old, crumbling, but still trying to pretend it was something grand. The front doors were carved wood, and when they opened, there were actual suits of armor in the foyer, not replicas either. Real ones rusted, dented, standing stiff against the walls. The lighting was awful. Dim yellow bulbs that hummed and flickered, barely illuminating the heavy rugs and dark wood furniture. The owner shuffled out from behind the counter when we arrived. He was this paper-thin man with grey skin and cloudy eyes, wearing a wrinkled white shirt buttoned all the way up to his throat. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and his movements were slow, like he was conserving energy. He spoke in a whisper that I couldn't really make out. Our group leader talked to him while I leaned against the counter, trying not to throw up on the floor. We were the only people staying there that night. The place was completely empty, except for the old man and a cat that wandered through the halls. The cat was grey and thin, and it had this horrible rasping meow that echoed through the building. It didn't sound like a normal cat sound. It sounded more like it was in pain or calling for something that wasn't there. The staircase that led up to the rooms was huge and fancy, carved marble steps and an ornate railing that spiraled upward. There was even a chip in one of the steps, like a big missing chunk that someone said had a story behind it. But I was too sick to care. All I could think about was getting horizontal. My stomach was already cramping so bad that I had to stop halfway up the stairs and breathe through my nose until it passed. The hallway to the rooms was pitch black. The lights were motion activated, but they were on a delay. So when you started walking, you were in total darkness for several seconds before they flickered on behind you, leaving the space ahead still black. It felt wrong walking into that kind of darkness. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the cat somewhere below howling again, the old pipes knocking inside the walls. When I finally got to my room, I barely registered what it looked like. There was a big window with heavy curtains, a desk, a bathroom door slightly ajar, and a bed that looked like it had been there since the 1960 seconds. I remember thinking the sheets didn't look clean, but I was past the point of caring. I went straight to the bathroom and stayed there longer than I want to admit. My body couldn't decide what end to attack first. I was shaking, sweating, completely empty. When I finally crawled into bed, I didn't even bother turning off the lamp. The dim yellow light filled the room, and I remember the hum of the bulb mixing with the ringing in my ears. I fell asleep fast, still wearing the same clothes I came in with. At some point, I woke up to a sound. The room was completely dark. The power must have gone out, or the lamp had been turned off somehow. The only thing I could hear was the faint jingle of metal. It took me a second to realize it was the door lock knob. It was shaking slowly, like someone was testing it from the other side. Not a knock, not a bump, just that faint, repeated jingle. It went on for what felt like forever. My head was still foggy, my stomach cramping again, but every hair on my body stood up. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knob stopped. The silence was heavier than before. I could hear the cat howling somewhere in the distance again, this time from the courtyard below. Then the door creaked. It started to open. The hallway lights didn't activate. The door swung inward so slowly that I could hear each tiny groan of the blind hinges. The darkness outside looked solid. I could see nothing beyond the doorway. My throat was dry. My body felt like lead, and I could barely whisper. I managed to say something weak, just a single word, and waited. No answer. For about 20 seconds, nothing happened. Then, the door slammed shut so hard the whole frame shook. The echo bounced around the room, and I flinched so hard that my stomach twisted again. I couldn't tell if someone had been there, or if the old wood had just warped, but it had definitely been open from the outside. I lay there sweating, trying to calm down. I had to use the bathroom again, but I couldn't make myself move. My whole body felt frozen. Like if I got out of bed, something would grab me. It took me a long time before I finally forced myself to crawl toward the bathroom. The air in the room felt heavy and damp, and the smell coming from the bathroom was sour and foul. As I reached for the door frame, I heard it. The sink turning on, a slow hiss of running water. My stomach dropped. I knew I had turned it off earlier. I was certain of it. The water kept running, steady and calm, as if someone was in there washing their hands. I stared into the darkness, waiting for the motion light to flick on, but it didn't. For a long minute, I just stood there, hunched over, my skin prickling, every sense screaming to run. I finally backed away, crawled back into bed, and pulled the covers up over my head. I didn't sleep right away, but I didn't move either. I stayed like that until exhaustion won out, and everything went black again. When I woke up, daylight was seeping in through the curtains. My stomach still hurt, but the worst of it had passed. I could hear voices downstairs, faint and muffled. My group had come back from their activities. It must have been afternoon. I felt drained, but I forced myself up, washed my face, and changed my clothes. When I went downstairs, everyone was sitting around this long, dusty dining table. The owner was nowhere to be seen, but the cat was curled up on one of the chairs, silent now, just staring at me. Everyone turned when I walked in. They looked tired and uneasy. I could tell something had happened. They started telling me that during the night, their doors had been opening and closing. Some said they heard knocking that would stop the second they got out of bed. Others said they heard whispering outside their windows, even though we were several floors up. No one saw anyone in the halls, and when they looked, the lights didn't come on. I listened while picking at a piece of bread, too weak to say much. I told them about my doorknob in the sink, and everyone just stared at me. Nobody laughed. Nobody brushed it off. The cat started howling again from under the table, the same rasping cry from before. It didn't stop until the old owner shuffled in, and the sound just cut off. That night, I didn't sleep much. None of us did. Every creak, every small sound made us tense up. By the morning, we were packed and waiting for the van before breakfast. The old man didn't come to see us off. The cat sat in the foyer, watching us go, its eyes following each of us like it knew something we didn't. When we got to our next hotel, nobody said much about it. Everyone was too tired. But I kept thinking about that door, how it had opened so slowly, how the lights in the hallway never came on, and how the water had run even though no one was there. I never figured out if someone had been messing with us, or if the place was just falling apart in strange ways. Still, I've stayed in a lot of hotels since then, and I've never experienced anything like that night in Madagascar again. But sometimes when I'm half asleep in a quiet room, I'll hear a faint jingle from a doorknob, or the slow hiss of running water. And for a few seconds, I'm right back there, sick, alone, staring at that open doorway, waiting for something to step through. We were supposed to be staying somewhere nice. That was the plan. A few relaxing days in Las Vegas, lounging by a pool, doing nothing but catching sun and sleeping off the road trip. But that changed when the couple we were traveling with told us they couldn't afford the hotel we'd picked. They were good friends, and we didn't want to make things awkward. So when they found a cheap Airbnb with a pool, we agreed to go along. I wish now that I had just paid for them to stay somewhere better. The drive started off fine. The sun was setting behind us as we crossed into the city. The sky fading from gold to that strange purple color that always seems to hang over Vegas at night. But as we kept driving, the streets started to change. The polished casinos and bright lights gave way to dim, flickering street lamps and empty sidewalks. Storefronts were shuttered. The people we saw walking around looked rough, faces sunken, eyes glassy, moving like their minds were far away. I tried not to say anything, but I felt the knot in my stomach, tightening. I just kept glancing out the window, pretending to be interested in whatever was passing by. But every few blocks, the streets got worse. The GPS led us through a few narrow side streets until we pulled into a cracked parking lot, lined with dented cars and broken glass. The apartment building stood tall and lifeless, beige walls stained with rust streaks and water damage. A few windows were covered with cardboard instead of curtains. I didn't want to say it out loud, but it looked like one of those apartment complexes that you see on the news after something terrible happens. I looked at my husband, and he looked at me. Neither of us had to say a word. The place was wrong. It wasn't just old or run down. It gave off a heaviness like the air itself was tired of being there. We parked and got out. The air was hot and thick, and the smell hit me almost immediately. It was hard to describe. It had this strange sweetness to it, like rotting fruit, mixed with something that made my stomach turn. On top of that was a faint layer of perfume, as if someone had tried to cover it up, but only made it worse. My throat closed up before I even realized it, and I instinctively pulled my shirt sleeve up over my mouth to breathe through the fabric. My husband asked if I was okay, and I nodded, blaming it on the flu I was just getting over. I'd been sick for days, nauseous and weak, so maybe it was just me being overly sensitive. That's what I told myself anyway. The hallway leading to the apartment was dimly lit, one bulb flickering near the end. The walls had been painted an uneven beige, and there were smudges and handprints all along the corners where people brushed past. The smell got worse as we walked deeper inside. I tried not to breathe through my nose. I could feel the nausea building in my chest again. The couple we were with was excited, chatting about how cheap the place was, and how we could use the money we saved to do something fun later. I tried to play along, but all I wanted was to get to the apartment and shut the door behind us. When we finally stepped inside, I felt a wave of relief. The apartment itself was surprisingly clean. It had plain white walls, old furniture, but it looked cared for. Most importantly, the smell didn't follow us in. It was faint, but the air was breathable again. I could finally take a deep breath without feeling like I was inhaling rot. We dropped our bags, looked around, and tried to settle in. My husband checked the small kitchen, while I went to look out the window. The pool was just below, surrounded by caution tape and a big plastic tarp that flapped in the wind. A large sign leaned against the fence. Pool closed under renovation. The water beneath the tarp looked dark, almost black. I remember thinking that if someone fell in, no one would even see them. That night, I went to bed early. My body ached, my throat was sore, and I was still fighting the tail end of the flu. I thought I'd pass out, instantly, but my sleep turned into something else entirely. I had one of the worst nights of my life. The dreams were vivid, almost too real. I remember flashes of people screaming, gunshots echoing down hallways, faces twisted in fear. I saw people being chased, cornered, beaten. I couldn't tell if I was witnessing it or living it. But I woke up over and over again, sweating, my heart racing. Every time I drifted back to sleep, it started again. The same scenes, the same chaos. I felt like I was trapped inside that building. Even when my eyes were open, when I woke up for good, the light coming through the blinds was pale and grey. I felt drained, like I hadn't slept at all. My husband was already awake, sitting at the small table, scrolling through his phone. He looked at me when I sat up. I told him I'd had terrible dreams, but I didn't go into detail. I just said, "People getting hurt." He nodded and didn't ask more. We spent another day there, but I couldn't shake the unease. The hallways always smelled the same. Thick, cloying, and sickly sweet. Even when I held my breath, I could still taste it somehow, like it clung to the back of my tongue. I started noticing other things too. The walls in the hallway had darker patches near the floor, like something had leaked or been wiped up half-heartedly. A door down the hall had police tape residue along the frame, like it had been sealed off at some point. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Every sound made me tense. The hum of the fridge footsteps in the hall, the faint dripping sound coming from the kitchen sink. Around 2 a.m., someone yelled outside, followed by what sounded like a car door slamming hard. I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the quiet to come back. The next morning, I couldn't wait to leave. We packed early and got on the road as soon as everyone was ready. As soon as we drove out of that lot, I rolled down the window and took a deep breath. Even the hot Vegas air felt clean compared to that place. We didn't talk much about it after. The couple we were with acted like it was no big deal. They said it was a great deal for the price. I just nodded and tried to move on. But the smell stayed with me. It would come back at random times, like my brain had stored it somewhere deep and refused to let it go. A few days later, when we were home, I brought it up to my husband. I told him I couldn't get that smell out of my head, that it didn't smell like anything I'd ever experienced before. That's when he told me. He said it quietly, like it was just a fact. He told me the smell was that of a decomposing human body. He's a paramedic. He smelled things that most people will never have to. He said there was no mistaking it. That sickly sweetness, that mix of perfume and death. He said someone probably died there, maybe in one of the apartments down the hall, and the smell had seeped into the walls. Maybe they hadn't been found for days. When he said it, my stomach turned. Suddenly, everything about that place made sense. The air that felt thick, the weird residue on the walls, the police tape marks, the heavy, restless dreams. I realized that I had slept just a few doors down from where someone had died, and decayed long enough for their scent to soak into the entire building. I thought back to that first moment when we stepped inside, when my body wouldn't let me breathe. It wasn't my flu. It was my instincts. My body knew what it was before my mind could process it. Even now, when I think about it, I can almost smell it again. That awful sweetness mixed with rot. I can feel the tightness in my chest and the urge to cover my face the same way I did that day. That trip was years ago, but it still comes back sometimes. Every time I walk into a building with a strange smell, my whole body tenses. I don't even realize I'm holding my breath until I'm outside again. I never booked another Airbnb after that. We had gone to Vegas, hoping for a few lazy days by a pool. Instead, we ended up sleeping in a place where death had lingered in the walls. And even though we left, a part of it never really left me. The smell, the feeling, the dreams, they still come back sometimes, like the building found a way to follow me home.